The rain fell in steady sheets over the neon-lit streets of Seoul, turning the asphalt into mirrors reflecting the chaotic glow of the city. Mira, a young black social worker, had stayed late at the shelter again, finishing paperwork while the storm raged outside. She never expected her quiet evening to shatter in an instant. A loud bang echoed down the alley beside her office. She froze, heart hammering, just as a figure bolted past the frosted window, colliding with the glass. The sound of footsteps and muffled voices followed. Then came the scream, a sharp, chilling sound that made her stomach turn. Curiosity and a sense of duty forced her to step outside, umbrella forgotten. Through the rain, she saw two men struggling with a third. One of the men raised a gun, and before she could react, a shot rang out. The world slowed. Her instinct was to duck, but she stumbled backward. The bullet struck the wall inches from her head. A fourth shadow appeared suddenly, taking control of the chaos. The men fell into line instantly, and the stranger's presence carried a dangerous authority. He was tall, his coat clinging to him in the rain, dark eyes sharp beneath the brim of a fedora. His face was set like carved stone, and the city seemed to part around him. Mira didn't recognize him, but she felt the weight of danger lift for a heartbeat as he moved toward her. "You shouldn't be here," he said in low, commanding Korean, though his voice carried a strange warmth beneath its hardness. He extended a gloved hand. "Come with me. It's not safe." Before she could protest, he had scooped her into a black sedan parked discreetly at the curb. The doors closed, shutting out the storm, and for a moment, the roar of the city dimmed. "Who are you?" Mira asked, still trembling. "I'm someone you're not supposed to see," he said, glancing at her with an intensity that made her shiver. He drove in silence for a few moments, the rain streaking across the windshield. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he added finally, his tone unreadable. Myra's mind raced. Witnessing a murder. Someone had died in front of her. I didn't mean to. I didn't even know what I saw," she stammered. He glanced at her, and the hint of a frown softened his sharp features. "It doesn't matter if you meant to. You saw it. And now, you're mine." The words weren't possessive in a way that scared her, though they should have. They were protective. It was the first clue that this man's world was a dangerous one, and she had just been thrust into it. By the time he pulled into an underground garage, Mira understood that this wasn't a simple act of help. The garage was sleek and fortified, not a public parking lot. He parked and turned to her, eyes narrowing. "You have to stay with me. Your life depends on it." "I can't just," she began, but he cut her off gently. "You can and you will. I can't let them, my men, touch you." His men. The thought struck her like a cold wave. She was caught in the middle of something massive, something she didn't fully understand. She tried to think of a way out, but the certainty in his gaze made her doubt she could escape. They stayed in the car for a moment, and the tension was almost tangible. Finally, he spoke, softer this time. "I will explain everything. But you need to trust me, just for tonight." Mira swallowed, unsure if she could. Yet something about him, his steadiness, the quiet command that made even chaos pause, made her hesitate before arguing. She nodded, tiny, cautious, unsure. Inside the garage, he led her to a small private office that smelled faintly of leather and incense. The space was simple but intimidating, minimalistic, yet clearly designed for someone in control. He motioned for her to sit while he paced. "I'm the head of a syndicate," he said without preamble. "Yes, the rumors are true. But I'm not here to hurt you." Her heart skipped. "A syndicate? So, the people outside, the ones with guns, those were your men?" "They are my men. They are loyal, but they also follow orders without question. They don't understand why you must live." She swallowed. The implications settled over her like a weight. "So, if you protect me, you defy them?" "Yes," he said simply. "And that's dangerous. I'm making a choice that could cost me everything. But you have to live." There was a pause, a quiet tension that seemed to stretch the walls around them. Mira noticed a faint hesitation in his eyes, the smallest crack in the otherwise unyielding mask. For a man whose empire depended on absolute control, admitting vulnerability was monumental. "I don't even know your name," she said, voice trembling. He hesitated, then smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "You don't need to know that. Just call me Han. For now." "Han," she repeated. It felt strange, clumsy on her tongue. But there was something about the way he said her name when he finally learned it, Mira, that made the word feel safe somehow. 4 hours, they stayed in that small office, the storm outside a distant roar. Han explained what he could, enough to make her understand the danger, without revealing too much about the syndicate. Every story of loyalty, betrayal, and power carried an undertone of his careful judgment. Mira listened, a mixture of fear and fascination knotting in her chest. Here was a man who could command armies, yet his first instinct had been to save her, a stranger, from the chaos she had stumbled into. And somehow, in the middle of danger, she felt seen. The night deepened, and the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Han finally turned to her, his expression softer, almost human. "You must sleep. There's a room prepared for you. Tomorrow, we start thinking about survival." I can't just stay here," Mira whispered, though a part of her knew she had no other choice. "You can," Han said firmly, his eyes locking on hers with quiet insistence. "If you want to live, you stay. That's not an order, it's a promise." Her heart thudded in her chest. The storm outside had slowed, the rain now tapping softly against the windows. Mira realized, with a mixture of fear and a strange, tentative trust, that she had been thrust into a world she never imagined, and Han, the man who had rescued her, was her only lifeline. And as the night settled over Seoul, both of them knew that their fates were now bound. The next morning, Seoul was gray and restless, a city that never truly slept. Mira woke in the quiet of the private room Han had prepared. It was simple, yet surprisingly comfortable. Clean sheets, a small desk, and a heavy door that promised safety. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to let the events of the previous night settle in. But reality was relentless. She knew the police would be asking questions about the murder she had witnessed. And she knew, now more than ever, that Han's world was one of shadows, where mistakes were costly and mercy was rare. The sound of the office door opening startled her. Han stepped in, dressed in a tailored suit that somehow made him seem even taller, even more commanding. Yet there was a softness in his gaze as he looked at her. "You're awake," he said simply. I don't know what to do," Mira admitted. Fear, confusion, and exhaustion all mingled in her voice. "I can't just go to the police without putting you, and yourself, in danger." Han shook his head slowly. "You saw too much. If anyone else finds out, you won't just be in danger, you'll be a target." He paused, studying her. "That's why I'm keeping you close. My men can't harm you if I'm the one giving the orders." Mira hesitated. "And if your men suspect something?" "They already do," he said quietly, almost as if confessing. "Some think I've taken a personal interest in you. That we're involved. That's why I need to act carefully." The words made Myra's stomach twist. In a world of crime, loyalty, and suspicion, rumors could be deadly. And yet, she felt a strange, reluctant comfort in Han's vigilance. Over the next few days, the tension in Han's office deepened. His right-hand men, those who had once carried out his orders without question, began whispering about the witness he had hidden. Han moved among them with quiet authority, answering questions with vague reassurances, all while keeping Mira in the shadows. She was never alone with him, yet their interactions carried a subtle intimacy. Small gestures, a shared glance, a brush of a hand when he handed her documents, the way he lingered near her when he spoke, made her heart flutter. She didn't fully understand it, and she didn't want to. She was supposed to fear him, yet fear had been replaced by something warmer, more complicated. Then, one afternoon, the inevitable happened. The office phone rang sharply, slicing through the quiet tension. Han answered with a clipped tone, then his eyes darkened. Myra's pulse quickened. "They're moving against me," he said quietly after hanging up. My men, loyal to the old order, are planning to take matters into their own hands. They think protecting you is a betrayal. Myra's stomach dropped. What does that mean for me? It means I need to act, Han replied, his jaw tight. And I need you to trust me. I won't let anything happen to you, Mira. But this will be dangerous. That evening, he guided her through the maze of Seoul streets to a safe house far from prying eyes. It was smaller, less luxurious, but fortified. Han spoke little during the drive, the silence heavy with unspoken threats. Once inside, he turned to her, finally letting his guard slip just a little. You've seen a part of my life that's unforgiving. You didn't ask to be here, but now you are. And I need to make sure you survive. Mira began, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. No arguments, he said, voice softer now, almost vulnerable. Just stay with me. Don't leave. Don't doubt me. Not yet. The words settled in her chest, warmth creeping over her fear. For the first time since witnessing the murder, she felt a fragile sense of safety. Over the next week, Han and Mira developed an unspoken routine. He protected her, ensured she ate, gave her space when she needed it, and yet never let her out of his sight completely. Every time she saw him, the danger in his eyes mixed with an intensity she couldn't ignore. They were forced to share close quarters, sometimes late into the night when Han needed to strategize against his own men. And in those moments, Mira caught glimpses of the man behind the syndicate facade, a man capable of tenderness, patience, even humor. He would smile at her clumsy attempts to help around the safe house, laugh softly when she spilled tea, and sometimes, just sometimes, his eyes would linger on her with a weight that made her heart thrum. But the outside world wouldn't wait. Police inquiries began pressing closer, and Han's enemies started making their moves. One night, Mira heard voices outside the safe house. She froze as shadows pressed against the windows, rifles glinting in the dim light. Han moved like a predator, silent and precise, guiding her to the floor, covering her with his body. "Stay down," he murmured, breath warm against her hair. "They're testing me. Testing us. I won't let them hurt you." Hours later, when the danger had passed, Mira sat trembling, her hands clutched to her chest. Han crouched beside her, his gloved hand brushing against hers. "It's over, for now," he said softly. She looked up at him, and something shifted. Why me?" she asked. "Why care so much?" Han's gaze was steady, unflinching. "Because someone has to. And because I can't stand to see harm come to you. Not when I can prevent it." Mira felt warmth spread through her chest, a connection she hadn't expected. In a world of violence and deception, a man who wielded power without cruelty, and who chose to protect her, was a rare thing. For the first time, she allowed herself to see him as more than a threat. Han was a man of contradictions, dangerous, yet tender, ruthless, yet protective. And in that realization, Mira felt something she hadn't dared feel since arriving in Seoul: hope. The storm of the city continued outside, unrelenting, but inside the safe house, for the first time, Mira felt a fragile peace. She didn't know how long it would last, or what battles lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain: Han had chosen to protect her. And that choice, in a world that demanded survival above all else, was the beginning of something neither of them expected, something that might just be stronger than the chaos surrounding them. By midweek, the tension within Han's organization had reached a breaking point. His right-hand men, once loyal without question, were openly challenging his decisions. The whispers had grown louder, fueled by the rumor that he had taken a personal interest in Mira. Some suspected romance, others betrayal, but all agreed she was a liability. Han knew confrontation was inevitable. He called a meeting in the syndicate's main office, a high-rise suite overlooking Seoul. The room was heavy with smoke and suspicion, men seated around a long table, eyes darting between him and the door. Mira waited nearby, hidden behind a partition, her heart pounding. "Han," one of his lieutenants said, voice edged with accusation, "protecting her, it's dangerous. She's just a witness. You risk everything." Han's expression was cold, controlled, but his eyes never left Mira, who had stepped slightly forward, refusing to hide. "She is not just a witness," he said, voice steady, authoritative. "She is under my protection. And if anyone dares harm her, anyone, they will answer to me." A murmur of disbelief ran through the room. Some men leaned forward, hands clenching. "You're declaring war on your own men?" another asked. Han's gaze hardened. "If loyalty means blindly obeying murder for convenience, then yes. I will defend what I believe is right." The room fell into tense silence. Myra's pulse raced. She had seen only fragments of Han's power, but here, commanding the room, he radiated dominance and unyielding authority. Yet beneath that, she sensed the risk he was taking, not for empire, not for profit, but for her. Days passed, and the storm of suspicion and betrayal intensified. Han's men tested him, sending spies, planting false information, and trying to manipulate situations to force him to hand Mira over. But each time, Han anticipated the moves, countering them with strategic precision. Through it all, Mira stayed close. Not hidden this time, by Han's side in meetings, walking the streets for brief errands under his watch, sharing whispered conversations in the safety of his office. And through these moments, something shifted between them. One rainy evening, Mira watched as Han leaned over a map, plotting movements against those who doubted him. His brow was furrowed, jaw set, every line of him taut with concentration. And yet, when he caught her watching, his eyes softened, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at his lips. "You're tired," he said softly, closing the folder and straightening. "Sit. Rest." "I can't just sit," she replied, though the exhaustion in her body was real. Han knelt beside her chair, resting a hand over hers. The gesture was gentle, grounding. "Mira, in this world, survival is a team effort. You are not alone." Her chest tightened. His words carried more than reassurance. They carried a promise, a declaration that amidst the violence and the fear, she mattered. And in that moment, Mira realized something she hadn't allowed herself before. She cared for him. Deeply. More than fear, more than gratitude, even more than trust. The days grew more dangerous. One night, a group of Han's former allies attempted to breach the safe house. Myra's heart leapt in terror as she saw armed men scaling walls and breaking windows. Han moved with calculated precision, issuing orders that flowed like water through the chaos. She followed his lead, ducking behind barricades, heart hammering with both fear and awe. After hours of confrontation, Han's control never faltered. The attackers were subdued, either fleeing or captured, and the safe house remained intact. Exhausted, Mira found herself in his arms as he guided her to a quiet room. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. The rain had stopped, and the night outside was calm, yet inside, the storm of what they had endured lingered. "You stayed," Han said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "Through everything, you stayed." "I didn't have a choice," Mira said, though her voice carried the truth she hadn't admitted before. "I didn't want to leave." Han's eyes softened, dark and intense. He brushed a damp strand of hair from her face. "I never thought I could want to protect someone like this. Not just because it's necessary, but because I wanted to." Myra's heart skipped. The words were more than a confession. They were an admission of feeling, raw and unguarded. She reached for his hand, holding it tightly. "I feel the same," she whispered. In the days that followed, the dynamic between them changed. No longer were they simply protector and witness. They were partners, quietly bound by trust, courage, and something that neither dared to name aloud in a world ruled by power and fear. The police, still investigating the murder Mira had witnessed, began asking questions that could have jeopardized everything. Han, ever vigilant, navigated the inquiries with precision, ensuring Myra's testimony was controlled and safe, preventing the authorities from uncovering the dangerous truth of his syndicate. Mira marveled at his skill, not only as a leader but as someone capable of deep care in a life dominated by ruthlessness. And each night, when they sat in quiet companionship, talking about nothing and everything, she felt the warmth of an unspoken bond. One evening, Han led her to a rooftop overlooking the city. Seoul's lights twinkled like stars fallen to earth. The night was clear, a calm after weeks of relentless danger. He stood close, hand brushing hers, and for the first time, there was no urgency, no threat, no shadows. "Look at the city," he said, voice soft. "All of this, it's mine, but it means nothing if you aren't safe. You made me realize that." Myra's eyes glistened. "And you made me realize that even in the darkest places, people can choose to protect, to care, to love." Han looked down at her, a rare, genuine smile tugging at his lips. "I didn't think I could ever let someone in. But you've changed that." For a long moment, they stood together, the city stretching endlessly below, the night air cool and soothing. And then, slowly, Han lowered his hand to hers, holding it firmly yet tenderly. Mira squeezed back, her heart full of a courage that had nothing to do with fear. They were bound now, not by circumstance alone, but by choice, by trust, and by the quiet, steady emergence of something neither of them had expected: love. In the days that followed, Han's men accepted, reluctantly, that Mira was untouchable. Rumors of romance persisted, but Han's authority was absolute. Those who questioned him learned quickly that some loyalties were not negotiable. And Mira, once a lone witness caught in a web of violence, found herself not only protected but cherished, a presence that had reshaped the most dangerous man in Seoul. The city continued its restless rhythm. Storms came and went, threats rose and fell. But within the walls Han had built, Mira and he discovered a rare sanctuary, a place where courage, trust, and love endured, even in a world that demanded survival above all else. And in that quiet triumph, amid the lights and shadows of Seoul, they found each other, not as boss and witness, not as protector and protected, but as two hearts navigating the chaos together, unyielding, unbroken, and quietly in love.